I want to welcome you to the expo too, because we haven't taken as much time welcoming people to the expo as we would like to have. But it's sort of a rolling process, you know, people come and more people come and then more people come. So we'll be saying this over and over again. Thanks for staying, thanks for coming. Hope you enjoy it today, tomorrow, and the next day. I've asked Clayson to introduce himself a little and introduce the society to y'all so that you understand where it came from a little bit. He didn't want to talk too long on the subject, but we'll see if he has a full length presentation, and if not, that's fine. We can dismiss at any point. There are partridge descendants jabbering over in the classroom. There's a lecture going on in the auditorium. And I'm hoping that you're getting the drift, that you kind of need to watch your program and go where you want to go. I'm going to use my introduction of Clayson, which I got before he sent me his, because I like the way it starts. Clayson was my hero and my mentor in the Lyman Society. He means the world to me. He was a founding father of the society in 2003 with 5 or 6 other people. He's faithfully served, as he likes to put it, in the shadows ever since. But from my perspective, he's the heart of the society. He's what has made it happen. Without him, there'd be no society. And I believe that. I don't know any details, but that's the way I feel about his personality, his character, his commitment. He once said to me, I trust you to do this because you have fire in the bones. And I think Clayson is the original fire in the bones Lyman. He was raised in Monticello, Utah. He was the son of Carl and Edith Lyman. He married Patricia Ann Prescott in 1961. They both graduated from BYU in 1963. Together they raised they raised 3 children in Southern California and other places. He pursued a career in international business, graduating with a master's degree in international commerce from the Thunderbird School of Global Management. His career took them to Los Angeles, Rio de Janeiro, and New Jersey, where he worked a lot in Manhattan. His wife, too. To Colorado, to Michigan, back to Los Angeles. And with the family of 3, he started to feel like that international business career was becoming an impediment to raising his children. So he dropped it and switched to a real estate agent, always with a dose of cowboy. Eventually he and Pat moved to Orem. She developed dementia, and he took care of her in her several final years, about 10 at least, where she got to the point of being unable to really interact with anybody. She finally passed away last year, and she had just moved to North Carolina at that time. After burying her, he moved back to California to take care of his sister, who has health problems. So, for such a vibrant, powerful leader, it's remarkable how he has turned into a service provider. And to me, that speaks volumes. That's all I'm going to say. He served selflessly in the Rotary International. He was president of District 5300 from 1991 to 1992. District 5300 extends from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. It's not a tiny district, okay? And he was for decades the director of the Monticello High Buckaroo Roundup, which is the alumnus gathering in Monticello. Grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Clayson, I hope that many people get a chance to meet you here.
Thank you. Well, I have a handout. Did everybody get this canary handout? It'll kind of tell most of the story about how it all started, but I want to take you back to something that happened.
Just in case.
Yeah. I want to take you back to something that happened in my life way before what I'm talking about in the yellow handout. I was raised in a ranching, farming environment down in Monticello, and I was a roughneck on an oil rig, if you know what that is. I helped mine uranium and worked at the uranium mill where everybody got exposed to a lot of radioactivity. And I didn't want to go to college. I was a cowboy, and that's all I wanted to do. We had 3 cattle ranches, and we were raising pinto beans and alfalfa and wheat, and for me that was just good enough. And my dad was worried about me because he was in the state presidency for 17 years during all of my growing up years, and he was kind of worried about me because religion didn't seem to be meaning too much to me during those years. I was kind of a wild buckaroo. The buckaroos are the Monticello High School buckaroos, and I was one of those wild ones. And so college was definitely not in my, I was lucky to get out of high school, quite frankly. In fact, every time it came to, you had to make grades to play on the ball team, and every time it came around, I had these two teachers I had to go beg to give me a C- at least. So it wasn't something I was looking forward to doing, and for sure, I wasn't gonna go to BYU because I wasn't connecting at all. And he came to me one day and he said, I'll make you a deal. He said, if you'll go to BYU for 1 quarter, I'll pay all your expenses, but you have to leave your car home. Well, I had a 1949 Chevrolet leaded in, lowered pipes. It was just an unbelievable car, and I was gonna have to leave that home to go to college, and that was a hard proposition. Make a long story short, I agreed to do it. And unbeknownst to me, he had gone ahead of me, and he had arranged for me to live in the basement of a house where the lady was gonna cook all of our meals, and I was gonna live with 3 returned missionaries. I didn't know that. And so as I was leaving, he said, oh, by the way, he said, you know, you have to take a religion class at BYU. I said, yeah. And he said, I heard that there's a Book of Mormon professor from Afton, Wyoming, who's a cowboy. And he gave me his name. And so that kind of sparked a little bit. So I get up to BYU and start pulling my cards, and I remembered that this cowboy taught Book of Mormon, so I got a card and I got into his class. And the first day of class, he comes in, he's wearing a Stetson, he's got some boots on, he's got a nice turquoise buckle, and he doesn't have a tie, he's got a bolo on, big turquoise bolo. And I thought, well, you know, this Book of Mormon stuff might not be too bad. And long story short, I signed up and got going, and in the, about October, middle of October, I was always studying at the Heber J. Grant Library because it was too noisy and there was a lot of going on, and so I studied there every night. And the library closed at 10:30. Anybody ever have experience with the Heber J. Grant Library at BYU? Maybe I'm the only one. Oh, some of you have. Anyway, they closed at 10:30, and at 10:20, they always said the library would close in 10 minutes. Well, I always went to the library and I studied my heavy classes first, and then at 10 o'clock, I pulled out my Book of Mormon to read my Book of Mormon assignment. On this particular night, as soon as I opened the book, I was reading in Alma. I had only been reading for a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden I had this really, really strong emotional feeling come over me. And it came very clear to me, as if a voice were talking to me saying, the things that you're reading in that book are true. You need to prepare to come back to BYU next quarter. You need to start preparing to go on a mission, and you need to start studying Spanish. I didn't have any idea about any of that. I mean, that was the last, I couldn't wait to get home. I had a big bay horse back in Monticello, and I was anxious to get back and get on with the cattle. That lasted about 20 minutes, because when I came to my senses, what woke me up was that she announced the library will close in 10 minutes. So I think that experience must have lasted for about 20 minutes. And it was a very physical experience, but my mind was very, very clear about those 4 points. So I went back to the apartment, and I was sleeping in the top bunk, and I crawled up on the bunk, and by that time I had been saying my prayers quite often. I mean, every night, as a matter of fact, and I started to pray, and this exact same exposure came. Exactly the way it did before, and those 4 points again were made very clear to me. And that really shook me up. So I went to see the professor, and I said, tell me what's going on. I mean, I don't understand this at all. He told me what was going on. Well, I had a little brother who's, I was 19 and he was 15 and a half, and I went back to school the following year, in my sophomore year. So it was Thanksgiving Eve, and I was driving back to Monticello for Thanksgiving. My little brother was one of these kids who was, he knew a lot about guns and outdoor life. There was a guy down there by the name of Kent Frost who, he loved the outdoors. He would take off out in the wilderness and be gone for 2 or 3 months and live off the land. And he taught my little brother how to do that. So Terry would go out in the hills for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. He had 47 guns that he and Kent had made. He was a real outdoorsman, and he could shoot like you can't believe. That night, Thanksgiving Eve, unbeknownst to me, he had taken a friend of his who didn't know anything at all about guns. They were out on skis hunting rabbits. It was a lot of snow. They had come back to this kid's trailer house to get warmed up. And the story we get from the young man is that they were drawing on each other, and he didn't know that they had a shell in his. He drew on my brother and pulled the trigger and shot him right in the nose. His bullet landed back in his neck. The story was that they were drawing on each other. I don't believe that at all, because my little brother was teaching hunter safety courses at the age of 15. So I don't believe the story, but that's the way it came out. So that night, my dad and I stayed up all night with him. He never gained consciousness. The doctor had told us, he said, I know where the bullet is, and I can get it out. So we stayed up all night. At 7 o'clock the next morning, my dad says, well, I'm gonna go home and shave and get cleaned up, and you stay here, and then your mother and me will come down and relieve you, and you can go home. Because we were up all night. At 7 o'clock that morning, just a few minutes after my dad left, my brother started having a real hard time breathing. What had happened is that wound, the blood had filled his lungs up his lungs had filled with blood, and he was strangling. So we called the doctor, who lived right across the street. 45 minutes he gets there, but in the next 10 minutes, I had my little brother in my arms, and he died in my arms. That really shook me up, because I had told my little brother, because now I was preparing to go on a mission. My sophomore year, I was getting ready to go on a mission and everything. When I leave on my mission, you turn 16, that car is yours. We were just really close. We punched cows together. We did everything together. So we had his funeral, and we took him down to the cemetery. And this Monticello cemetery was awful. Weeds and old barbed wire, rusty barbed wire, trash. And we put my little brother about 4 feet down in a box. And that haunted me something awful. I was having the awful dreams about this. I started courting an attorney in town's daughter. And I went to pick her up one night, and she was late. And so he and I start talking, and I tell him about this experience about that cemetery. I says, that god-awful place has got my little brother about 4 feet under in a box rotting away. And the cemetery is just, it haunts me. He says, well, there's something you can do about that. I said, what? He said, you can start a cemetery district, and you can tax all the property in the district and use that money for perpetual care and maintenance and upgrade of the cemetery. So he made arrangements for his attorney partner and I, and 2 ladies who'd been working in the cemetery, to go to the city council and make the presentation. The city council and the mayor bought up the Klein and Sinker. And the mayor said, Clayson, you're the chairman of the committee. Now all you have to do is get all the people inside this district to vote to raise their taxes, and we'll have this done. Well, I went out and campaigned, as did everybody else, and the final vote was 325 to 17, 325 yes, 17 no, so we got the district. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because I became a cemetery guy. To me, the way to find out if a community is civil is you go visit their cemetery. Incidentally, this is a lovely place to visit right here. But anyway, because I had had this spiritual experience that led me to go on my mission, and because I had had this experience with my little brother Terry in that cemetery, I had reason to think a lot about family. And back in 1985, as you can see on this handout, I got to thinking a lot about, I knew a lot about Albert, and I knew a lot about Platt, but I didn't know a lot about Amasa, and I wanted to know about Amasa. So back in 1985, I helped charter the first Sons of Utah Pioneers chapter in California. We chartered with 76 members, or 78 members, what it was. And I started really getting into this Amasa thing. I wanted to find out, who is this guy? So I drove to Delta, and I met Dr. Melvin Lyman, who published these two books, the big book and the little book. And I've read them through, just really became involved in that. So in 1997, I had talked to my cousin Scott Lyman about doing something about Amasa. In 1997, I went up there and I met with Scott and another cousin by the name of Jay Bishop. And we talked about this idea of doing something for Amasa, to get to know Amasa. And I didn't realize it, but they had both been thinking along those same lines. So in 2003, or 2001, or I think it's 2001, it's in the notes, when you get past 80, it starts to lose a little bit. But anyway, in 2001, I think is when we met, we formed the society. This Jay Bishop was a real innovative guy, and he had come up with some guidelines and all of the tax stuff. And so we formed it, and he was named the first president. And then we formed it and decided what we were going to do for dues, and from there it started to go. And you'll see in the handout who the other presidents have been since that time. But I was convinced then, and I'm even more convinced now, that this work that we're doing is a very sacred work. It's very unusual. There are a lot of big family organizations. But I want to say, I don't know a lot about some of the others, I've found out a little bit, but I want to say that this organization has evolved to become a very good organization as far as reaching our objective, which is to try to find the descendants and expose them to what we're doing. Now, Dave Busafe is a good friend of mine, and I want to say, you know, when you get in the arena and you're in the arena and there's all these people sitting on the fence. Well, ever since we got this thing going, Busafe was there, and he had 1 foot in the arena and 1 foot on the fence, and before long he was in the arena. And he was in the arena strong. And so when it came time to find a new guy, it wasn't very hard to figure out, we need a player. And it turned out to be a godsend for this organization. This last 5 years, this organization has changed and grown big time, much more than it had the previous years. And we're headed in the right direction. I don't know this new brother that's taken over, but it looks like he might be a winner too. So
he is. I can vouch for him.
Well, I'm gonna corner him here, lasso him and tie him down a bit and find out about this. But I wanted you to kind of have a handle on why that happened as far as me. And I have a couple of quick questions I'd like to ask you. Why would you join the society? What's the reason why you would do that? Any takers? And there's what is going to benefit? You know, we do things because we have a benefit. So why would anybody join the society? What good can come to you personally or to your loved ones by joining the society? Any ideas?
I've had a lot of time to think about that.
You sure have.
And I feel that it is a matter of reverence about redemption. Reverence you display by your concern for cemeteries and so forth. You know, we reverence the efforts of our forefathers by remembering them, by refreshing our memory of them. And redemption, because just like all of us, Amasa was human and a kind and a gentle leader type of human with devotion and faith and commitment, who went through a struggle, but in my mind he was redeemed. And I just hang on that if he could be redeemed, any of us can also be redeemed. In fact, that's the name of the game. So just to be able to reflect on that routinely, remember him, reverence him and his descendants. I don't care too much about my fifth cousins generally. They're so far away from relationship. I care about my first cousins and second cousins, but this idea of having an instant love for family with somebody like you or Scott or this Scott or Tom or any of the Lyman descendants towards Amasa and towards the restoration of the church means a lot to me. It makes me feel a part of something big. And I'm already part of something big. I'm part of the church. That's far more important to me. You know, but this is just a very personal aspect of it. Kind of like we were hearing about Louisa Mariah. Stuck with Amasa when he fell away, when he got kicked out. Because she loved him. I love him too.
You know, it was under Dave's guidance that we embraced this redemption concept. And it's big. I mean, it is really, yes, Scott.
Well, I was going back to your previous question about why we would want to join a society like this. And maybe I can share what came to my mind in an anecdote. My wife is a convert to the church, and the only member in her family, the rest of her family, in fact, they opposed her joining the church and made her wait for years before she could join. And so she has done a lot of genealogy work because she's the only member in her family. And it's been wonderful to see that, because many of us that have, 6 generations on every side of our family, there's not a lot we can do. But she had gathered a lot of family history and found that a lot of her ancestors were from Massachusetts. And so a couple of years ago, she said, can we take a family history trip? Just go back there. I've got all these materials, and I want to go to these little towns where my ancestors lived in Massachusetts. And I want to go see the towns and see if we can learn about my ancestors and maybe visit their graves and things like that. I'll never forget driving, I don't even remember the name of the town now, but we drove around, we went to Concord and other places. But we went to this one little town out in Massachusetts. We went to the center of this town, and they had a gazebo, a little bitty park, and we didn't know where the cemetery was. We just asked somebody there on the street, hey, where's the town cemetery? And they said, oh, down the road. So we went down this road, old, we're talking cemeteries from the Pilgrims. And my wife said, well, here's the name of some of my ancestors that I think are buried in this Pilgrim cemetery. And so I had these names, and I started walking, it's big, walking around, looking for these names. And I found a name, and my wife was over there looking, and I waved and hollered and said, I found a name. And she walked over, and she looked at the name and looked at the gravestone, and she said, because her family, was just not an LDS family, she had no contact with that. She said, Grandpa, Grandma, because it was the first grave she'd ever seen of her grandpa or grandma, even though they were back, I don't know how many generations. And her emotion that she felt in making that connection was marvelous. And there was a spirit there. There is something deep inside of us that wants that connection with our ancestors. And I think it enriches our lives.
Well, we all know the scripture in, what book is it? Turn the hearts of the children to the fathers.
All books.
Yeah, anyway, I feel the same way. It's a sacred work. And as we get exposure, we have these emotional, did any of you or all of you see Dave's presentation about Amasa this morning? Did any of you see it? You need to see it. He's going to do it one more time. Are you going to one more time, right?
Tomorrow at 9.
Everybody in this expo needs to see him. He's really good, and he gets into it. I mean, he gets into it. He's been doing this for a while. We had him do it back in 2003, and he was really good back then. But he's gotten a lot better. I mean, you were good then, but you're maturing in the process. It's something everybody needs to see.
I'm now the right size.
Okay, well, I have another observation. This idea of getting into the arena. I have found in the things that I've done in my life that there's a lot of people that encourage you to get into the arena. And they're there yelling for you, yeah, Bo, come on, yeah. But there's not very many that are actually willing to be to accept the invitation. And to me, if we get into this arena, it's not a heavy commitment. It's simply a matter of doing something like what I just did as I came here today. Just before I came today, I filled out that form for books and for membership, and I paid the dues for my 3 kids. Now, I don't think my 3 kids, my son cares, but I don't think my 2 daughters are too excited about that. You know, they're raising kids and trying to do their thing. But the fact is they're gonna get a little bit more exposure from dad. So to me, it's not like heavy commitment. I mean, heavy sell, it's not a hard sell, it's just a matter of letting people know, hey, this is the organization, this is what we do, and you might wanna read this book. Now, when these 2 books that we referred to, do y'all know what we're talking about, the 2 red books?
Yeah, I've got one here.
You got the first, you got the small one, okay, that's the first one.
First one.
That's the first one. The second one is about this thick, and it is loaded with all the names, the birth dates, the marriage dates. So we know that Amasa had 34 children, and 39 children, 37, 39, 34. Anyway, he had 234 grandchildren, and they're all deceased. So we have to take those 234 grandchildren to find, but that second book's got all the names, all the dates, everything's in there. And we have it available now on CD. I think it's on CD, isn't it?
Yeah.
But, so just maybe getting one of those, or having your kids or your family get one of those and just look through it. This is the book they need to read first. The Amasa book first, I think, is good because it gives you a foundation for who the heck is Amasa. And then that second book, if they've got any spark of interest, that second book is gonna tell you who the players are. I was just going to throw this out. You know, we've had 5 years of Dave Youthsafe and organizational leadership, and I just wondered if anybody has any ideas about what our good brother Scott can consider as we move forward. Anybody have any ideas or thoughts? I think on our roll, we've got what, right at about 1,000 people on our rolls.
Yeah, there were 900 and about 100 have removed their names, so we're down to 800. We keep adding a few, dropping a few, adding a few, dropping. But Scott raised the same question a minute ago, so I'm glad you're bringing it up. Would it be good to develop a form, he's asking, to have people put down a word or 2 about that question while they're here?
I think it'd be an excellent idea.
Yeah.
I was thinking on Saturday, we'll have probably the biggest attendance.
We should have.
We just, everybody comes in, give them a piece of paper
Yep.
with 3 or 4 or 5, maybe
Yeah.
not big questions, but, you know, like, what would you like the society to do? What do you
Yeah.
like? What, you know, and we'll come up with a list of questions, get some feedback from everybody.
If you only got a 5% return, that would be a good start. I want to just tell you a little short experience I had here just a few.
I have one suggestion.
Oh, yes.
If we can get everything on, what is it, online where you can view the pictures, I can't think of the name right now.
YouTube is one.
Well,
Family Search is what I want to
yeah,
use.
Family Search. We could get all those people with all the photographs, for instance, put that online where we can access it, would be great.
Now, we have quite a few photos online now, don't we?
Absolutely. Family Search has been filled out quite rapidly.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you a little short experience that I had here just recently, and as far as this missionary work is concerned. I had occasion to go to Richfield a couple of weeks ago for the baptism of my twin grandsons. And I decided that I would stay over Sunday and go to church in Richfield. And so I go to this ward, and the bishop is a Lyman. And I think he's quite a famous Lyman. I posed the question to you, I think, on an email as to whether Dilworth is a brother to this brother. But anyway, he gave me his information. He was the bishop and he was busy, but I got enough information out of him to get his email and his mailing address. And so I went back home and I sent him the expose on the on this event. Plus a few other little goodies that I thought might entice him, because if he's the same Paul Lyman that I'm thinking of, this guy wrote the history of the Willie and Handcart Company. And it's very detailed, where he actually stopped at all the places and describes, and it's a very good, and the way I met him was I met Dilworth, and I think Dilworth is Paul's brother, at BYU, where he was making a presentation on his new book. But anyway, what I'm saying is it wasn't a big deal for me to send him an expose on the expo and to encourage him to come. And I'm anxiously waiting to see if he makes it.
I'm wondering if Matt knows him. Paul Lyman,
From,
Richfield, Bishop.
yeah, there's a Paul Lyman that's a judge over there.
That's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've met him.
Yeah.
Been replaced.
He is, I've met him years and years ago.
Oh, you did?
We were both, he wouldn't remember me, but 30-something years ago, we were both in the same law firm in Denver for a few months. He was leaving when I arrived. And I did get to talk to him, and he is a descendant of Amos Lyman.
Oh yeah, he's big time descendant.
Yeah, he's very,
But,
he'd be a good person to contact. 'Cause I know, yeah, I know he's been a successful attorney in Richfield. I didn't know he'd become a judge.
Yeah, he's a judge now.
He was a county attorney, and he was very.
yeah, he's an esteemed judge. I talked to, I made it my point to talk to 5 or 6 people there about him, and everybody thinks he walks on water, so that's good. But what I'm saying is, we spread the news as opportunity allows us to do it in a very unsalesman-like way, just in a quiet, easy way to be accepted. And I think we might be surprised at how many seeds are actually going to take root and grow. And I don't think Dave or Scott, either one, would object if we doubled our membership in the next year or 2. You've got 5 years to go from 1,000 to 2,000.
Once you get to 2,000, you have to start paying MailChimp quite a bit. It's $70 a month now.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so we might have to, but it's free until 2,000. So we might have to look at other options if we get to that point, because when we were trying to use Wild Apricot, we were frustrated at having to pay $50 a month and decided it wasn't paying for itself, so we quit it. But MailChimp's been good, the free service.
Yeah. When you get in the pinch, if I'm still alive, you call me and tell me how much you need, and
Thank
we'll
you.
figure out.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to tell you how I feel about all this. You can tell that I've had some very emotional experiences with my little brother and the cemetery down there. I don't know if you've ever visited the Monticello Cemetery or not. Probably a few of you have. If you haven't, you know, St. Peter's waiting at the gate. And there's some questions he's going to be asking you. One of the questions he's going to ask you is, he's going to say, Dave, tell me about the horse head. That's all he's going to say. And if you've been to Monticello, you know all about the horse head. Anybody know about the horse head in Monticello?
I know because you showed me.
Well, here's Monticello at 7,000 feet. And immediately behind Monticello, I mean, I can be up in the mountains in 5 minutes, is the Blue Mountain. It rises to 11,500. And on one of the slopes, the trees have grown in such a way that it looks like a horse's head, a bally-faced horse. Now, I know that Lynn doesn't know what a bally-faced horse is because he's a city slicker, but a bally-faced horse is a horse that has a point face.
You forget I was raised on a ranch in Wyoming.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, I say that facetiously because he pitched hay and milked cow, or branded cows and everything from the time he was a chieftain. But
We always look at that horse head and look for it, so to our kids and our grandkids, and it's quite a thing. There's a few trees I'd like to trim up there to make it a little more clear.
there's been a lot of people say, let's go trim the trees, and there's a lot of us who say, you stay off of that mountain. But where was I leading on that? You know,
Talk about the cemetery in
yeah,
Monticello.
the cemetery.
St. Peter's.
Oh yeah, so St. Peter's going to ask these questions. He's going to ask, one of the questions is, tell me about the horse head. The other thing I say kind of facetiously, but I halfway believe it, is St. Peter is going to ask these questions in only 2 languages. One is Spanish, the other one's Portuguese. So those of you that are not in the saddle yet, you know, you need to get your foot in the stirrup and get on with it. Have any of you ever been to the Wellsville Cemetery up by Logan? Wellsville Cemetery? Well, my high school coach, who I adore. I worshiped him from the time he came. I was only in the 5th grade when he came, and he was there way after I left. He's interred in the Wellsville Cemetery. And every time I head that way, I spend a good hour in that cemetery. And that Wellsville Cemetery is an absolute beauty. It's just well manicured, and they've got the flags and the poles, and just everything is there to make it a very memorable experience. Now this cemetery, they put up flags. Has anyone been out the cemetery recently? They got 6 flags out there. They need 7, there's 1 missing. The POW MIA flag's missing, but they got all the rest of the flags. But that cemetery is symptomatic of a community that has got their act together civically. I think they do. And you know cemeteries, but you also see cemeteries that are just a mess. The same principle applies to us reaching out and making what we've got a jewel in our hands, but making this organization even more of a jewel under Scott's guidance now. And so I hope that we will get serious about this. And as opportunity comes, you know, we have these pass out cards in the church. So you say, well, for this month, I'm gonna take 6 pass out cards and get them done. Or I'm gonna hand out 4 Book of Mormons this month or whatever. It wouldn't hurt to have an expose. Scott, maybe you can come up with a real exciting expose that's a handout, and we can start handing out the society to those we meet. Of course, we want to know if they're tied into AML, but maybe not. Anyway, I want to bear you my witness that as far as I'm concerned, and I have a very deep emotional feeling about this, we're on the right track. And I have to believe that Grandpa Amasa, and for me, Grandpa Platt, Grandpa Albert, and my old dad are very pleased to see what we're doing, that we're preserving the heritage that we have received. And I bear you this witness in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Clayson. Clayson, I want to flesh in one more point, since you gave me a minute before I release everybody. There's another man too that meant the world to me that Clayson would have mentioned if he'd thought of it. His name was Ted Jones. And Ted Jones was my scout leader. And Ted Jones took us on trips down to Blanding. I had no idea he was a cousin. He was from Cumin Jones, Lydia family. And he took us to southwest Utah and southeast Utah and showed us the beauties of Red Rock country. And he was one of the presidents that's on here.
The second president.
Second president. So I found out about the expo from him, by the way, and he was very gracious and generous to me. At that point, I moved back to Salt Lake after many years away. Point I want to make is that Ed Lyman has been saying, and his cousin have been saying that showing our teens Hole in the Rock and Red Rock country is a very powerful way to connect them. They might not come to a history-rich expo, but they do understand beautiful sights and torturous adventures. And so that's a part of the tradition in my heart that we can continue. You know, we can really make a lot of progress with our young people that way. Well, one more hand for Clayson. Thank you so much. Clayson will be with you tomorrow, so tell people to come and get to know Clayson.